Thank you so much for being here. One of the things we really wanted to do was to help bring Melbourne Metrics, which is such a great, doing such great work for students, to our community, the broader community, so that we can really share and help schools engage in conversations around what is important about what is to measure. I am now going to hand over to Professor Sandra Milligan, who's been working and assessing, we call it complex competencies, for more than 30 years. So she's got a lot of experience in that sort of thing. So Professor Sandra Milligan, welcome to the NEASC community. We look forward to hearing from you. And I think if you now share your screen, all's good to go.
Okay, thanks very much, Darlene. Thank you, Trillium. It's a great pleasure to be here. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go very fast, because I understand that you are all educational leaders, that you've been working in this area for a long time. And so what I'm going to try and do tonight is give you a taste of what we're doing, why we've done it, a little bit of the background and a little bit of the foreground. But I don't want to speak for too long to stop discussion, so I'm going to go very fast. I'll leave my slides with you, and hopefully if there are things that I've obfuscated or haven't been clear, we can follow up later. But I do want to get the story out tonight rather than the details. So here I go. Is that okay, Darlene? Can you see that? Or Trillium? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning, really. And what we notice in Australia, and I think in most Western countries, is that the pattern of schooling that we have today is observably and recognisably operating in the same pattern established in the 1880s. So where at that time everyone was supposed to learn how to read and write, and that was the priority, with a few elites getting a little bit more than that. Curricula were all centralised, curriculum were in syllabuses, chunked up into subjects, chunked down into periods of study, taught by expert teachers. Because teachers weren't trusted very much, if it became high stakes, there were external examiners, etc., etc. I don't need to go into that. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And the general feeling is that the grammar of our schooling is very recognisably still rooted in the 1880s. It's still recognisably there. Now, as a result, that worked okay up until the point when most systems around the world said, well, you know, that's not really what we need. We really need a fully educated citizenry, and everyone needs to get a really good education. And I guess certainly in my longish career, we really started in the 1980s to get really serious about educating everyone in the community. And since then, we've struggled, generally speaking, I think it's true to say, where people are saying, well, it's not enough just to teach literacy, numeracy and subjects. We need people who know how to be lifelong learners, to know what to do when knowledge changes, to be flexible, adaptable, etc. In some parts of the world, certainly in Australia, retention rates are flat. Truancy and absenteeism is a problem. Mental health issues are on the rise. Applications to university are flat, blah, etc., etc., etc. Now, so those sorts of patterns are very common. And as you know, most people who do the day-to-day work of education in schools have been doing things about it. And as I understand it, the school leaders in NEASC schools have been to the forefront of this, working very hard to broaden their curriculum, change their learning designs, modernise their pedagogy, etc., to slowly start getting a sort of a 2020s pedagogy or grammar emerging in schools that sets kids up to thrive this century, not 2 centuries ago. Now, I sort of feel from what I've heard that your schools are a long way ahead in that regard. But, and, you know, we work with schools like that in Australia and elsewhere as well. But around about 15 or so years ago, we started getting some of these schools who were really working hard on this coming to us and saying, well, you know, we know what we need to do with the curriculum. We know what we need to do with the learning design and the pedagogy. We're working on this. But unfortunately, the assessment and certification system, the common thing, is holding everything in place. As soon as it gets serious for parents, they feel as though they have to revert to the examination system as the thing they trust. Students still say, but is it on the exam, before they're prepared to dive into it and engage. So the schools that we worked with said that the assessment and certification system is holding us back. And that's why we started engaging with them. Ellen and I work in an outfit called Melbourne Metrics. We at the University of Melbourne, we're what we call an enterprise unit in the university, which means that we have to make our own money. And we're measured ourselves on our impact, as well as citations and things like that. And so, and our specialism is assessment, recognition, and certification. So these schools came to us and said, look, we need something aligned with with the learning ambitions that we now have with our students. We want it aligned with the pedagogy and learning design that we now have. We want some metrics that people will trust, which means that they need to be robust, scalable, comparable. We want them to be recognisable so that they can be used at national or international level. We want them to be useful, etc., etc. You get the general picture. So that's what we've been working on since about 2007. The way we work is that we work in partnership with schools only. We co-design everything we do with our partners, our research partners. And we started in 2007 actually working with education systems interested in looking at the foundational learning competencies that special needs students who are working below foundation level needed. And we've gone from there. So typically we're looking at the foundational skills, the learning skills, the complex competencies that learners need to be able to become excellent learners, and which underpin learning in all domains. And what we've learned with our partners, some of whom are on this slide. What we now say very boldly as a set of partnerships is that we do think we now know what these next generation assessment methods that are aligned to the new grammar look like. So assess, and I've put some of the characteristics of the assessments, the assessment approach we're using on this slide. There's a lot on this slide, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the essence of these assessment methods is that we're trying to build a comprehensive profile of the strengths and competencies of learners that tell them what their strengths and competencies are that will enable them to thrive in the future. You can't do that by examinations. So we do 360 aggregated assessments based on teachers, judgments. We generate profiles, not scores. There's all sorts of things. I'm going to come back to some of these things, but we think we've now got an approach to assessment that matches the new learning ambitions that schools have developed over the last 20 or so years. We have a matching approach to reporting and credentialing. I've just got there the front page. All of these are digital.
I'm not able to see the PowerPoint. I'm supposed to be seeing that.
Oh, you can't see it?
No, I don't have other.
Is everyone having the same problem?
I can see it. Sandra, I can see it. Delina, I wonder if it's on your end.
All right. Okay, fine.
I'll send it to you anyway. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see it. Okay, look, but what this slide shows is the front page of the sort of profiling approach to assessment we use. These are actually the front pages of a series of credentials that now some of our partners are using. So the top credential here on the right is a credential that is the front page of one used by Big Picture schools in Australia and a little bit in the US. The second one is by the South Australian Education Department, which is rolling them out to all of its schools. The bottom one is a credential that the University of Melbourne is producing for some of its partnership schools. And there are others that are of this ilk that are starting to emerge. Look, what I'm going to do now, what's the time? Okay, we're going fine. I'm going to just I've picked 10 points that I want to make about this just this evening for an audience like you who's very experienced. And the 10 points are, I think they're principles or themes that underpin our work that might interest you. So I've given you an overview of what we think we're doing. I now want to dig a bit more deeply and talk to you about I don't know whether they're principles or themes or premises that underpin our work, but they're just 10 of them. I'm going to take hopefully about a minute per theme or premise. And I hope that will give you an idea of the sort of thinking that's underpinning our next generation assessments and credentialing to match the next generation learning ambitions that schools are having. So here I go. I'm going to go very quickly. The first one is this. We've tried to capture what characterises the learning ambitions in the curriculum approaches that schools are having. Now, this is very abstracted, but I sort of like this. This is my favourite ever slide. Well, it's become my favourite over the years. And it sort of goes to what schools want, which is essentially at the centre a thriving student, a thriving learner, someone who'll thrive at school and beyond. And we know from social psychology and so forth that the ingredients for any human to thrive are things like developing a sense of competence, being fully connected to their community or their culture, having a sense of purpose and a sense of autonomy in the belief that they can contribute to their community. So they're the things that underpin it. And the blue and the green blobs are sort of the elements of the curricula that the schools put together to try and get their students to thrive. So the green ones are the traditional curricula, knowledge, math, science, the domain skills, how to solve a quadratic equation, basic skills, literacy and numeracy. But the blue things are the complex, transferable competencies that underpin learning in every area. Knowing how to learn, personal virtues like integrity and persistence, social skills like collaboration and communication, interpersonal skills like empathy, the capacity to be purposeful and critical and creative thinking. So these are the things that this diagram sort of captures how people, in an abstract way, how our schools and our partners have been thinking about their learning ambitions. And underpinning all of that, up in the top right-hand corner, is a sort of bottom line, which is that they're supporting their learners to become producers of their own learning, not just consumers of teaching. Now, that's a big shift. That's why it's not an 1880s grammar, it's a 2020s grammar of schooling. So it's very different. This slide is abstract, and it's my way of trying to grasp the commonalities across the schools that I work with. So I'll be very interested to see if any of that resonates with you. So there you are, I'll put that question out there before we go much further. Now, the second point I want to make, I'll be quicker on this one, is that in this new grammar, you cannot focus on knowledge and cognitive skill alone. You've got to focus on competence, which is the capacity to perform that uses the knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and beliefs that a student holds to be able to perform when they are expected to do something in a domain of interest. So for those reasons, because we're always looking at the competence of the learner, whether that's in mathematics or communication, doesn't matter what it is, it's competence, not just knowledge. And that, of course, means you can't use examinations because you can't test competence by what people write or put on a page. So that's a core premise underpinning our work. The next premise that underpins our work is what we mean by assessment. This is my poem, which, you know, if I'm not really a poet, let's face it, I'm a quant kind of person. But so I've just sort of centred, justified and coloured up a list of things that I think are part of next generation assessment and recognition. And so this definition or poem is as concise a definition of what we mean by assessment and recognition as I can get. It's taken me years to get this concise, but assessment is a process, it's not an event, of gathering evidence of what a learner is capable of in a complex domain of learning in a variety of situations, so that we can make a considered judgment about their position on a scale of competence from less expert to more expert, which shows what they know and can do and what they need to learn next, with a sufficient degree of competence to support them in their learning and to provide recognition of their attainment that people can trust. Now, every line in that poem has a lot of work behind it. If you just think about it, you know, that people can trust. I'll come back to that one. A scale of competence from less expert to more expert. Each little line in my poem has meant years of work for us. So to make this process work for schools that have stronger learning ambitions. The fourth point I want to make is where I said we've got to position people on a scale of competence. These scales are not numeric scales from 0 to 1. They're typically scales with about 4 or 5 levels in them that clearly and qualitatively make clear the distinctions between someone who is less expert and someone who is more expert. If you're talking about something like communication, you don't need a 100-point scale. You only need a 5 or 6 or 4-point scale to be able to tell the difference between someone who is extremely competent and someone who's not. So that's another important thing about this assessment. So we use progressions that are empirically verified and very tested, and they form the standards underpinning all the assessments and reporting that we make. Look, the other thing is, in all of these complex transferable competencies that we assess, we all know that it's very easy to put together a rubric to assess kids on these things. And that's what most of us do when we're starting out. What we found, of course, is that the different rubrics are not very comparable. They don't have the same set of standards underpinning them from school to school or country to country. So we've built a common currency of standards that underpins all of our assessments, so that different schools can use different competency frameworks, but there is a common set of elements that have been calibrated, leveled, and can be used to structure any competency framework. We have not yet, although nothing's impossible, found a competency framework in a school that we can't map to our common underpinning currency and standards. And this is what gives us, certainly what universities are interested in when we say, look, we've got a common language here, we've got a common framework, and these assessment instruments are attached to it. So that's been a big plus for us. And I'll tell you a little bit more later, but we're also connecting that competency framework to course profiles in tertiary institutions, so that universities are in a position to get a match between the competencies that are required for success in a course and the competencies underpinning a student profile, so that it's possible to get a match. So that's been very interesting. What am I up to? 6th premise is that learner agency is important, not only in learning, but also in assessment. So our assessment approach makes a lot of opportunities for students to exercise agency in the assessment, scaffolded by the school, using a variety of ways. And that's been a feature of our design as well. Very important. And the more agency students have in their assessment, the more likely they are to become learners who can look after themselves even when they're not being coached. In all of this, we've been very conscious that teachers are certainly not the only stakeholders. Students have to know and trust and understand what's going on, but so do tertiary institutions, as well as teachers and schools. So in all our work, we try and pay attention to the needs in a school of all the different stakeholders that need to know and trust what's going on. So, you know, again, there's a lot of work behind each of these slides, but that's the 6th thing I wanted to tell you about. The 7th, oh, look, I think I can't count. I'm an assessment quantitative academic who can't count. So I hope you'll forgive me for getting my numbering wrong. But the next point I wanted to make was, particularly as schools are getting reports, which they send home to parents, or reports that are going to universities or other employers or whatever, the employers and the parents and the tertiary institutions need to understand what they are saying, and they need to trust. And this is the word trust is huge in our little community. And this is our wheel of trust. So these are the things that we and the schools that we work with examine, underpinning the any assessments and reporting that we do, so that we're in a position to say we believe that the assessments that are represented on this report for this student are a reasonable representation of exactly what that student knows and can do, and that they are mapped to common standards so that you can compare them one to the other. Now, that's a big call. That's a very big call. And we're in the process of making ourselves and others confident that that call can be made. And I guess this is part of our most recent research, what the trust wheel means for teachers, what it means for schools, what it means for tertiary institutions, and how you make sure you can do that. I think this is the second last slide I've got, which is to do with a major exercise we're going through at the moment, and have been for the last couple of years, working with tertiary institutions to get them to trust what we're doing and get them to the point where they can use these profiles systematically, including institutions like my own, who are the top of the pecking order. So they're the ones who have to sift through many applicants. So how can we get them to trust and use these new kinds of assessments and credentials? And this is, I mean, I could talk for 2 hours on this one alone. And it's very interesting, the shifts that are going on in tertiary selection at the moment, as universities they want new learning ambitions for their students as well, and they want greater diversity in their students as well. They want a greater coverage of students as well. So universities are coming along as well, and they're starting to look at what the schools are doing too. This is I always feel a bit I'm not sure whether I should show this slide, but I'm very proud of it, so I think I should. We were assessed by McKinsey late last year, where they did a review of all the assessment systems that they could identify that they thought that systemic people might look at if they were trying to get to next generation assessment and credentials. And they assessed us as being the most advanced and fit for purpose solution amongst the ones currently available. So we were very happy about that. They weren't saying we were perfect, but they were saying, I think, that we've been working on this for a long time. So you'll forgive me for doing a little brag there, but I was very happy to see that. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Ellen. These are the sorts of questions that people ask us, and I'm happy to expand on these or any other questions that you might have. So anytime. I am extremely pleased, however, to be able to hand over to Ellen Heyting. Ellen has only been working for us, for a year? Ellen, is it?
Yeah, about 18 months.
18 months, my goodness. And it's just been wonderful because she has experience in your ecosystem and has been able to be a translator for us, I hope both ways, to see the connections between what we do and say and how we do it and say it. and the world of NEASC and international schooling and IB. So I'm very pleased to hand over to Ellen, who will, I hope, help you make sense of what I've just said and be able to anticipate some of your questions. So Ellen, over to you.
Thanks,
I'll
Sandra.
stop there.
Yeah, and I'm going to go quite quickly and just make a few broad generalizations, I think, where I see some connections between NEASC's work and ours at Melbourne Metric. But it's really lovely to see so many familiar faces and names on the call. I think from all the international schools I've worked at, there's someone I can make a link to. So that's really lovely for me too to hook back into that world. But I think, you know, in the big picture, both us at Melbourne Metrics and NEASC are looking to find more meaningful ways of, you know, evaluating learning, which can be used as sort of a guide to help students find their pathways beyond K through 12 schools. And I think we both really value, you know, the soft skills that are perhaps becoming more important in the world today. I think there's such strong, even mirrored language that I see between particularly the ACE learning principles and the way we talk about learning at Melbourne Metrics. And we draw from a lot of the same underlying literature. And sometimes when I'm reading things, I can't tell, is that a NEASC thing that I've just picked up, or is that something we've put out at Melbourne Metrics? I also really, you know, think that the focus of the shared learning ambition for a high quality learning for all is something we share and something we pursue in all of our schools, in all of our students, in all of our schools. And just like NEASC, you know, we're not accepting of the status quo of education, or, you know, it's worked for that way for the last 20 years, so we'll keep doing it that way. But, you know, our work requires leaders and teachers to go beyond what schools have always been and adopt next-gen ways of thinking and teaching and assessing and recognising and credentialing students' competencies and success in the same kind of way that the ACE learning principles are kind of a, you know, opt-in or challenge by choice that really push schools to think, you know, I love that phrase in a lot of the NEASC things about, you know, what if, or, you know, what could be. And that is sort of a lot of our driving force at Melbourne Metrics as well. We do a lot of our, well, all of our work with partners, with schools, and it's that question that they often come with us. If they've got a problem, they want to help us, they want us to help them figure out, or they often come with us with a what if we could do it this way? And I think that's a lot of some of the same conversations people, particularly in the ACE world of NEASC, would be involved in. So, just one other, I thought, really interesting link was we really like NEASC's focus on impact and how, you know, as opposed to some other sort of accrediting bodies that maybe look like for more procedural elements or check boxes or outputs, but the focus on impact on student learning really resonates with us. And it's something that we hold ourselves to as well when we're measuring our own success. I just wanted to maybe draw connections between some of the ACE learning principles. I know you've all got them, you know, memorized and know exactly what they all are. But I think, you know, the first one, learning purpose, is pretty clear. This, you know, shared appreciation of building competencies that are transferable for knowing that our learners will be entering worlds that we can't even really quite fathom what they will look like yet. So, you know, needing to develop these you know, transferable complex competencies is important. And then also this idea that evidence of learning is, you know, both multifaceted and multimodal and not bound necessarily to an artifact like an essay or a test result or a lab report. A saying that we have at Melbourne Metrics that I quite like is that competence resides within the student, and it's the expert teachers that create learning environments where these competencies can be developed and demonstrated and then observed and assessed by teachers. And I think that really works with the ACE approach as well. And then, you know, principle number 5, learner engagement and autonomy. I think really the only difference in our approach there is the word. You know, we use the word agency in learning, and NEASC has gone for autonomy, but really we're talking about the same things. And Sandra had that beautiful phrase there that, you know, we're trying to shift students from being consumers of teaching to producers of their own learning. And I think, you know, that's captured in principle number 5. And just very quickly, finally, the last one about research and seeing the whole school community as a community of lifelong learners. You know, we're really lucky to be at such a cutting edge research university in the University of Melbourne. And we really make use of and tap into that network to get collaborators both, you know, from within the University of Melbourne. So the likes of Pasi Sahlberg, John Hattie, Yong Zhao have all been involved in our work, but also our wider, research ecosystem that we tap into as well. So, but really at the heart of our research really is our partner schools that join us on this work, and you know we couldn't do the work without schools. So that's why we're always really excited to tap into networks like these and connect with other schools. So I'm going to stop talking there because I think it's much better use of time to address some of these great questions in the chat and some of those maybe FAQs that Sandra had up there as well.
Sure. Thank you so much to both Professor Milligan and Ellen for the work that you've done and shared with us today. Firstly, Professor Milligan, thank you. It was inspiring to see the work where you've come from and the ability to bring together so much of the goals that we have as schools and educators to change and provide a quality learning environment. But the need we've had and need that both parents understand and are anxious about is having a way of assessing it that is trustworthy. And it's extraordinary what has been achieved, and we look forward to contributing and working with you as you move forward. How about we just open up the conversation, Sandra? I think there are plenty of people with conversations and questions. I can take one or two out of the chat. Ellen, unless you think you know and know a lot of the major ideas that come up, would you like to choose a question and get the conversation started? And or Sandra, if there's something that you'd like, especially in here, or if you want to share your Q&A that you had before.
Go on, Ellen, you pick one.
Oh, I'm just picking up one from Louis, and Louis just, you know, commented that he heard that podcast you did with Tim Logan on future learning design. But his question is really about, have you had any success with other pathways such as employment and entrepreneurship, not just tertiary education? Do you want to speak to that at all about our involvement with industry, Sandra?
Yeah. Yes, we started with special needs kids in 2007. We've sort of been working up the schooling ladder and outwards. So into primary and secondary schools was a logical step. We also have done some work with industry, with organisations like accounting, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and with industry groups who are doing community, I guess, renewal. So when they're trying to change from communities running around coal-fired power stations and trying to turn them into hydroponic farmers, because so we've been working with industry in that regard, and universities are now coming on strongly. Where I think I'd make 2 points about the vocational education sector and the employment sector. We've found them harder to work with, although they're getting more and more interested, because I don't know why they are. Well, I do know why they are, but they're much more complex, localized organizations. And particularly with small business, there's no one that tells them what to do. So you're needing to change the whole ecosystem before they get the general idea. But we're working with peak organisations, for instance, in Australia, the Australian Industry Group. In the Philippines, we're working with the Education Department, who is looking at employers who take the kids who leave school early, and working with employers to get them to understand how they can assess their young employees for the transferable skills so that they can learn how to learn and support the industry. So there's lots of different avenues. I guess we think that the university pathway is really important because most schools have a parent base who are very influential, who are very focused on that university pathway. so that it's important that we have something to say about that. And the universities are now getting interested in working with us as well. So that's not very precise, but it is a major issue. I think there's another 10 years work to do before we start getting the vocational sector as interested as the university sector, and probably another 15 years after that before the small business sector, that there's a cultural shift sufficiently there. I don't know, you probably have a better idea than I do. Actually, Louis did make a comment there about, which I thought I really liked. He attributed it to me, I no doubt said it, the difference between standardized assessment and standards-based assessment. That's a really big distinction. And we work with standards-based, but not standardized. So we are together, we're a bunch, the team at Melbourne Metrics is a sort of eclectic bunch. We've got philosophers, psychometricians, teachers. I think, Ellen, you're a psychologist at core, aren't you? So we've got a very wide range. And one of the core things we're always looking at is how we can assess in ways that don't impose a cultural or organisational framework, where you can act. So the aim is to get to the core competence of the student without it having to be biased by all the surrounding things. And the way to do that is to have some clear standards of behaviour that represent expertise in different areas, rather than just sitting down to a standard task with a standard rubric and a standard way of reporting all the time. It's a big difference, and one that's been challenging but very rewarding. So Louis, I was really pleased that you picked that one up. It's one of my favourite points. Thank you. Just while people are thinking, there were a couple of ones I can address pretty quickly. What's the difference between social skill and an interpersonal? Look, all these categories are just sort of made up. They're really not there in nature. They're just ways you can use to talk about things. But so when I talk about interpersonal, I'm talking about you to me. So am I showing empathy? Am I showing respect, etc.? Whereas social, it's more, am I communicating to everyone? It's more two-way, multi-way. There's no huge distinction that I would hold forever. It's just a way of talking about different categories of elements of competence that seem to underpin our work. Does that make sense? Who asked that? Ted, I think, was it?
Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
Sandra, I've got one here in there from Melanie, asking about assessing complex skills and competencies can be time consuming. What are your partners working on, and as finding the extra time that's needed in teacher schedules to do it differently like this?
Workload is a real issue, mainly because, depending on what kind of school it is, but definitely I think schools like yours, your community expects you to do things, and you can't just stop doing things. So if you're doing something new, it's extra for a while. So our schools mostly find that they're doing extra, at least to begin with, and then slowly things equilibrate, and it hopefully will get worked in much more into the normal day-to-day work. However, so there's always extra work, and it is an issue for schools that we work with, and sometimes, particularly our early research partners, we called them crash dummies because we were trying everything out and they had an enormous amount of work to do. We're trying, and we're scaling that back now. But there is a big underlying question there of how much assessment is done to kids. And we don't want to just add more and more and more assessment so that we're doing everything we've always done and we're adding on more things to get this holistic picture of a whole student. So our more advanced people who've been doing it for a couple of years now are seriously considering what they can stop doing now, and how to keep the assessment moderated in terms of workload and experience of kids. And a part of that is hopefully getting the students themselves to be more involved in it so that it's more part of what they do, making sure that teacher judgment doesn't require new tasks all the time, so that the observation can be more naturalistic in the day-to-day working with students on complex learning design. So the workload is a serious point of discussion all the time. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. And there are being some interesting and novel ways of addressing that. One of the things that when our schools work with us, they learn some things from us, we learn some things from them, and they all learn something from each other. And so the workload issue is something that goes around and everyone learns a little bit and contributes a little bit to that. That wasn't a very distinct answer, was it? But it was truthful.
No, it was absolutely open, and I think it's a huge part of it. Doing anything differently is always going to take time to sort out what we want to do. And there's one other question here about the university acceptance. I think that's the big thing that parents ask about, students ask about, schools want to know, is this going to work? Do you find that you've got, my understanding from Ellen and conversations with you before is that you've got increasing numbers of universities in Australia accepting the competency-based certification that you use as entry level into university? Are you finding that's growing? Are you talking perhaps with NTC, ETS in the US, or rethinking assessment in the UK so we can get a joined up approach for universities worldwide that would help our students?
Yeah. Okay. So again, I'm going to be very frank here. In Australia, where these profiles have now been in existence, this new approach to assessment and certification has been a reality for now 4 years. We have 50% of our institutions who will now accept at least one of the certificates as an alternative to the mainstream, A-level kind of or IB kind of certificate. So that's 50% of Australia's universities. However, that 50% are not the elite universities. So the elite universities are far slower at coming to this, and they're coming to it mainly at the moment as a cautious approach to increasing diversity and equity in their intakes. And it's behind the scenes, for instance, in my own university, which we call the Harvard of Australia, not just tongue in cheek. But in my own university, they're certainly interested in the diversity argument, but behind the scenes, they're thinking our employers are now demanding that our graduates have these complex competencies. It's probable we should be selecting for them as well, but they're not going to come out until there's a bit more evidence, which they're looking to us to gather. In terms of rethinking assessment, yes, Bill Lucas and his people have done some work with us, and we're continuing to do that in the hope to get connected up thinking, as you said. We're working with MTC. They've got a beautiful profile, but up until recently, they certainly haven't had the assessment to support it. I don't know whether they're joining with ETS is going to change that. ETS has got a reputation in the market. It will be interesting to see how that goes. But certainly we're working with MTC, we're working with rethinking assessment. We're tic-tacking with people like IB. I don't exactly know where they're going, but they're obviously important players in this area. So we're wanting a connected up approach, and we're working as hard as we can to get that. Can't remember if you had another component to the question.
No, sorry, that was a lot. It was a complex question, but thank you, Lizzie, for the question, because it's raised that, you know, the question around university acceptance, which is at the heart of all of us trying to support our students. We have a couple of other questions, and I'd love to just get one or two more in before we close. From Leslie Snowball, wondering, to what extent is this process done digitally, and do you have experience implementing it, for example, with marginalized students and unskilled, untrained teachers?
It's highly, as you can imagine, in an ordinary school, if you've got students who are being assessed based on teacher judgment across the whole subject range and co-curriculum sometimes, and different students are assessed by different teachers on the same competence, it can get administratively very messy very quickly. And so the digital supports for the administration and collection and analysis and reporting is very important. When we first started this, we looked everywhere to find some digital supports. Not finding anyone, we've built our own. We've got this platform called Ruby, which most of the people who work with us use, which holds the whole thing together administratively and quality-wise for schools. So yes, it needs to be digital. The biggest challenge we've had in that, going to the unskilled teachers and etc., and lack of digital affordances, is that in the Philippines, where we're working with the alternative learning system, which is targeting the 4 million kids who are out of school and in work and therefore can't be in school. And so we've been working with them for 4 years now, setting up through their networks of alternative learning system hubs, assessments of the transferable competencies of young people, where the assessors are their employers, their teachers, their peers, and themselves. So, you know, a 360 scan, all put together theoretically in a digital, in a digital base, but with no internet connections. So often. So we have ways of getting paper-based things translated into, you know, the olden days. Remember scanners and so forth? We're still able to use those things. And so getting assessments made by unskilled people in multiple languages against standards that we've put huge amount of effort into making very clear to all of those people, and it seems to work. The UNICEF is funding that, and there's been a big evaluation of it. So yes, you need digital. Yes, it can be done without internet connections, surprisingly enough. So there you go.
we've got hope. There's hope for all. Thank you very much, Sandra. What I'd like to do now is actually hand over to our executive director, Trillium Hubel at NEASC, to close off and perhaps ask one last question. Thank you so much, both you, Sandra and Ellen, for your time today. Trillium, all yours. Let's
Yeah,
hope
hopefully my Wi-Fi will work a bit better now. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sandra and Ellen. Darlene and I have had the opportunity to have several conversations with them, and we knew that we wanted to share what they're working on with a little bit of a broader community. This will be part of an ongoing conversation we plan to have this year around assessment and the aspects of learning principle 3. So look out for some additional conversations coming. I wanted to just also mention that how much we appreciate hearing from really highly expert people who are not only saying that education needs to change, but showing us how to do it. I go to a lot of events and conferences, and we hear all these keynote speakers telling us exactly what you started with early in your session. And yet we hardly ever leave those conferences feeling like, what would that look like in actual practice? And so to me, the most exciting thing about hearing about your work and your honest impression of where the challenges are is just that real work with a research base with really, really smart people is happening. And so we want to be a part of that in any way that we can. And first off, by just sharing what you're doing with our network. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And I know that there were many questions unanswered, but I have a feeling you might hear from some of these people separately.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I would suggest if anyone would like to continue the conversation, please get in touch with me. We'll be putting together a conversation group to move forward a little bit. Thank you so much, Sandra and Ellen, again for your time. And thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate you joining us from our community.